everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. October 1st marks the 75th founding anniversary of the Korean Armed Forces. As it falls on a 6-day holiday this year, Seoul staged a large-scale military parade today. Tanks and armed forces marched through central Seoul, showcasing South Korea's key weapons, including the Hyunmoo surface-to-surface missile. Such a military parade is staged for the very first time in a decade, as one did not take place under the liberal Moon Jae-in administration. What key weapons were people able to see, and what message was Seoul trying to send to Pyongyang? For more on this, we welcome Professor Joel Atkinson from the Graduate School of International and Area Studies of Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor Atkinson, welcome.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Thank you for being with us. All right, we also have Professor Ban Kil-joo from the Ilmin International Relations Institute from Korea University. Good to see you, Professor Ban.
Pleased to be here.
Thank you. Now, first question to our Professor Ban. So, South Korea, as I said before, staged a large-scale military parade in central Seoul, marking the 75th founding anniversary of the country's armed forces. Now, what is the legal basis for this parade, and how significant have these parades been in the past?
Sure. The regulation of the country's Armed Forces Day was enacted by the President's executive order in 1956, but abolished in 1976. And then in 1982, the Armed Forces Day was again included in the regulation on various anniversaries. As of right now, the executive order of 33620 notes that the Armed Forces celebrations are made to demonstrate the prowess and combat power abroad as well as at home, and to raise the morale of the soldiers. Based upon both legal and substantial aspects, I would say that these celebrations matter from the perspective of 4 actors. First, when it comes to a domestic audience, a large-scale military parade helps the Korean public be proud of its mother country and feel confident in its military strength for protecting themselves and their assets. Moreover, this parade contributes to helping citizens enhance their sense of security. Second, it is helpful for soldiers and the military as a whole. This parade helps soldiers raise both their pride and morale, furthermore enhances military readiness. With a large-scale parade being prepared, the military has an opportunity to intensively check its military readiness and posture. Third, it is helpful to deter North Korea's provocations. Demonstrating state-of-the-art weapons contributes to raising South Korea's deterrent power at the end of the day. So this parade helps deterrence work by preventing North Korea from miscalculating. Finally, this parade creates synergy regarding international actors. As international actors turn their eyes to a large-scale demonstration, South Korea's prestige is going up. Moreover, this weapon demonstration is most likely to be helpful for exporting weapons more in the international arena. All in all, a large-scale parade is sometimes needed even in democracies for pride, morale, deterrence, and prestige.
All right, I see. Given that what Professor Ban talked about, it seems this military parade has very much significance. Now, Professor Atkinson, but this is the first such a parade in a decade, as I said before. For those who might not be familiar with Korean history and Korean politics, why was one not held during the liberal Moon Jae-in administration?
Yes, so these parades have been held every 5 years since 1998. By both progressive and conservative administrations. The exception was 2018 when the progressive president, Moon Jae-in, decided that there wouldn't be a parade. And he gave many reasons for that. One, he said, was it places too much of a burden on soldiers, the personnel having to train in the summer heat. But the main reason seems to have been that he was hoping to foster conditions to encourage talks between Washington and Pyongyang and inter-Korean cooperation. So he decided that that would be best done by not having a parade. And instead of a parade, there was a concert. There was some big names like Psy were there, and it was more of a celebration for the service people. There was a few, there was a flyover, the aerobatic team, but there wasn't this military parade.
Right, so it had to be downsized because we had to consider relationship with North Korea. Now, this time, however, it was staged on a very large scale, showcasing the integrated capabilities of Army, Navy, and Air Forces in the heart of Seoul. And President Yoon Suk-yeol himself participated in the parade, which was the first time as a Korean president. What does this hint at?
Yeah, so my understanding is that in the previous parades also the presidents took part. So you can see them, the photos of them in the vehicles. I think it very much shows his kind of role, emphasizes his role as the commander-in-chief. And, the amount of integrated capabilities on display, it's about, sending a strong message to North Korea about the capabilities that Korea has, but also arms exports is a big focus for Korea, the so-called K defense. So just the range and the new weapon systems that were on display for the first time, really sends that signal of strength, but also that Korea is a major player in the arms industry.
Right. Well, since our professor brought up the weapons that were displayed, I'd like to ask Professor Ban. South Korean strategic weapons, including the Hyunmoo homegrown missiles, have been displayed. Could you tell us what other major weapons that were on show during the parade?
Well, first of all, a raft of tactical weapons was demonstrated in this large-scale parade, including K2 Hukpyo, South Korea's major battle tanks, 처음으로 multiple rocket launchers, and KAV, Korea Assault Amphibious Vehicle. Meanwhile, what matters more is that strategic weapons or new versions of weapons based on Korea's three-axis system were open to the public, aimed at enhancing its deterrent power in a situation where North Korea has stepped up its nuclear provocations. To that end, LSAM, a long-range surface-to-air missile, scheduled to complete its development by 2024, was open to the public for the first time. Since LSAM is a key asset for South Korea's three-axis system, the appearance of this weapon is expected to enhance its deterrence power significantly. High-yield ballistic missiles called Hyunmoo 5 were included as well. It is noteworthy that hybrid systems based upon multi-manned unmanned teaming as well as unmanned systems were demonstrated. In particular, the next generation of Aegis destroyer, Jeongjo the Great, joined the parade while applying the technology of AR, augmented reality. All in all, major weapons from all three branches in the military appeared in the parade along with their soldiers.
All right, there certainly were a lot to see. Now, Professor Ban, one more question. Another scene that was worthy taking a look at was how over 300 combat troops from the 8th U.S. Army under the U.S. Forces Korea took part in the parade. Could you tell us more about this?
Sure, as you're well aware, it is the 70th anniversary of the ROK-US alliance this year. So a number of events and celebrations continue to go on, which included the ROK president's visit to the White House in the last April. In this line of efforts, the 75th founding anniversary of South Korea's armed forces serves as a golden opportunity to show international society, as well as the citizens of Korea and the United States, that the ROK-US alliance has maintained successfully for about 70 years, serving as a role model of alliance politics in the world. In this respect, this celebration seems to help enhance the ROK-US cohesiveness simply beyond the demonstrations of both tactical and strategic weapons. That explains why the largest U.S. forces attend this celebration, which included 300 soldiers, combat soldiers from the 8th Army. By the same token, demonstrating the watertight alliance by the attendance of American combat soldiers seems to be aimed at offsetting provocations of aggressors like North Korea. To be more precise, I believe that showing their cohesion in taking advantage of this parade is significant to send a warning to North Korea and Russia in a situation where an arms deal between the two countries seems to be made.
All right, I see your point. Now, I'd like to move on to how North Korea might perceive this. And so, Professor Atkinson, last year, as far as I know, North Korea fired 2 ballistic missiles on the very day, on the Armed Forces Day on October 1st. And that being said, should we expect any provocation around this time around?
No, I think my understanding is the Armed Forces Day and these parades are not a major factor kind of influencing the timing of North Korea's tests. But I think most experts are looking at a kind of increased tempo of those tests moving forward, but not really influenced by the timing of this parade.
All right, I see your point. Now, Professor Ban, I'd like to also tap on ties between Russia and North Korea. Now, staying on the North Korean front, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov is to visit Pyongyang in October as part of follow-up measures from the Kim-Putin summit. Now, before we move on to the actual possibility of Putin visiting Pyongyang in the near future, experts say Russia officially and quite promptly responding to Kim's invitation is quite rare. Is this right?
Well, it is unexpected and rare indeed that Putin disclosed his acceptance of Kim Jong-un's request to visit North Korea so early in a situation where this deal was condemned by international society. In the beginning, the Kremlin pretended to deny this acceptance, but changed this posture, although the reason behind this change has been unknown. By the way, one thing seems for sure. North Korea-Russia cooperation seems neither temporal nor tactical, at least for the time being. As you noted, Foreign Minister Lavrov is scheduled to revisit North Korea in order to make follow-up measures, including very possibly an arms deal and combined exercises. Since Putin accepted Kim Jong-un's invitation, the October meeting is most likely to bring the North Korea-Russia summit in Pyongyang to the table. What does it mean? I would say that the two countries attempt to make the bilateral cooperation periodic and institutionalized. Meanwhile, China, as an intervening variable, seems to have an impact on how cohesive North Korea and Russia will be.
All right, I see your point. Now, Professor Atkinson, though our Professor Ban already pointed out, I'd like to ask you again. If Putin's visit to Pyongyang does take place in the near future, it would be the first time since 2000. What significance would it have, and could it be considered as a milestone to strengthen their bilateral ties?
Yeah, well, I think it will be a milestone. 23 years is a long time between visits. So it really, it matters. And I think it really speaks to Putin's desperation and his isolation following his decision to invade Ukraine. So, by visiting Pyongyang, he gets, can move closer to North Korea, have access to the weaponry, the artillery shells that he might need, and also maybe even create a bit of leverage with the West, warning them that if they don't make concessions in Ukraine, then he can always help North Korea more. And, for North Korea, it's a real golden opportunity, access to, advanced Russian military technology, and a real chance for them to show, for Kim Jong-un to show that, show the Americans that their efforts to isolate him are not as successful as they would have hoped, and also, President Yoon as well, showing that, Kim Jong-un is not isolated, and he has access to the help that he needs to carry on with his weapons program.
Right, I see. One more question. How do you believe the South Korea and the United States would view such a visit if it really takes place?
Well, I think, they'll be very disappointed, and we'll see some threats. President Yoon's hinted that he could always help Ukraine more, and the Americans also have warned that this shouldn't happen. But beyond that, there's probably not a lot they can do about it. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if it does go ahead.
All right, I see. Now, Professor Ban, I'd like to tap on North Korea and China relationship as well. It seems North Korea did not send a high-level delegation to the Asian Games in Hangzhou. And some reports say this shows the lukewarm relationship between Pyongyang and Beijing. What's your view on this?
Well, it's a three-dimensional equation to me. Anyhow, we need to take a look at the absence of a high-level delegation by North Korea to the Asian Games in Hangzhou from the perspective of sports diplomacy. You know, diplomatic arena, major sporting events serves as an indirect method to convey its message to the other. If a high-level delegation is dispatched, it is intended to show its willingness to improve its relationship with its counterpart. If it is not, it means it is unpleased and unwilling. Earlier, Beijing sent a lower-level delegation to Pyongyang on the 75th anniversary of the foundation of DPRK on 9 September 2023. In response, Pyongyang sent a low-level delegation to Hangzhou. It is kind of the symmetrical relationship in terms of sporting events. With these insights in mind, as of right now, the North Korea-Russia relationship seems more cohesive than the North Korea-China relationship. Meanwhile, there remains a possibility that Pyongyang will send a high-level delegation to the closing ceremony of the Asian Games. If it happens indeed, the lukewarm relationship between the two countries might be improved. However, the fact that the Kim regime does not send a high-level delegation to the opening ceremony still shows less cohesive relationship between Pyongyang and Beijing than before. So I believe that North Korea's behavior is intended to enhance its diplomatic leverage to both Russia and China by taking advantage of the new corridor mechanism strategically.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Atkinson, since we are talking about China, I'd like to ask you this. Recently, South Korean Prime Minister Hankuk and Chinese President Xi Jinping met with each other. And reportedly, it was Xi Jinping who first brought up his potential visit to South Korea. Could we see this as a hint of Xi's willingness to improve ties?
I think it certainly is a hint. Xi Jinping last visited Korea in 2014, and after that, there's been several Korean presidential trips to China. So this issue of Xi Jinping visiting Korea before Yoon goes to China has become a real litmus test of China's willingness to work cooperatively with the Yoon administration. So if he's willing to do so without some serious preconditions, if he's not expecting any concessions on the THAAD missile defense or anything of that nature, if he's basically willing to come without preconditions, then it will be a clear signal that he's really working towards a more cooperative relationship. And I think you could give President Yoon some credit there for creating the conditions for that. He received a lot of criticism for abandoning a so-called pragmatic approach or leaning too close to the United States. But it certainly seems that by strengthening the relationship with the US and reaching out to Japan, Xi Jinping is, wouldn't say he's concerned, but he's obviously, he wants to counteract that to some extent at least. So that's created the conditions where he's potentially willing to meet with the South Korean side in a more cooperative way.
All right, I see. Now, Professor Ban, I'd like to ask you this last question. Some say managing the relationship with China could prevent so-called new Cold War dynamics from becoming fixed in the region. What's your view on this, and how should South Korea's diplomatic direction be towards China?
Well, it could mitigate Cold War mechanism, I guess. Well, I think improving relations between South Korea and China helps stay away from the new Cold War mechanism towards the cooperative posture, although it might not be effective significantly. I believe that the South Korea-Japan-China summit is linked with the South Korea-China summit, which means if one is made, the other is most likely to be made as well. China has seen the trilateral summit between South Korea, the United States, and Japan at Camp David very negatively. However, if the trilateral summit between South Korea, Japan, and China is made indeed, it means that one group of trilateral cooperation is comparable with the other group of trilateral cooperation. This comparability is expected to make the principle of inclusiveness function in the diplomatic arena, turning out to help mitigate the new color mechanism at the end of the day.
All right, I see. Now, Professor Atkinson, may I ask your opinion as well?
Yeah, so I would probably frame it a bit differently. I think Cold War, rather than a Cold War, a focus on a US-China kind of bilateral tension, what we're really seeing is a worsening spiral of relations, not just between China and the United States, but also, China and India, China and Japan, and many other countries. So, again, it's a very worrying dynamic, and the region is certainly heading in that troubling direction. And it's not within South Korea's power to change that. But what South Korea can do is kind of identify what way the situation's heading, identify the kind of trajectory, and try to get ahead of events rather than being dragged along behind them. And I'd say President Yoon's doing a relatively good job of putting the country in a position where it's not always caught on the back foot, or it's not always playing catch up. So the outreach to Japan, improving relations with the United States, but also being open to talking with China and cooperating where possible is probably the best that South Korea could hope to do.
All right, I see. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Professor Atkinson, thank you for your time and insights. Thank you. And Professor Ban, thank you for your time and insights as well. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.